It's a new month and we have a new Visa Bulletin. So let's jump into the March 2026 Visa Bulletin and see what has changed, if anything, and make sure that you know exactly how to read the Visa Bulletin, what it means, and what it can do for your case. I am U.S. Immigration Attorney Lilian Chukwurah, and I help my clients get green cards and citizenships for themselves and their families using the U.S. immigration law system. And yes, I know the system keeps changing every single day, but we still have to work within that system and we get our clients' results within the changing system. So we, as always, are going to start with the categories because there's F1, F2A, F2B, F3, and F4. If you do not know what any of that means, let me educate you. F1 is the unmarried sons and daughters of U.S. citizens. So these are children that are over the age of 21 but are unmarried. F2A are the spouses and children of permanent residents. These are unmarried children that are under the age of 21. F2B are the unmarried sons and daughters of permanent residents. Again, children of permanent residents that are now over the age of 21 and are unmarried. F3 are the married children of U.S. citizens. F4 are the siblings of U.S. citizens. As you can see from the Visa Bulletin, and if you have been watching my videos, you already know this, only U.S. citizens can file for their married children and their siblings. Okay, permanent residents cannot file for their married children or their siblings or their parents, but we're talking about the visa category here. If a permanent resident files for their children and that child decides to get married before the permanent resident becomes a U.S. citizen, that application is automatically void because permanent residents cannot file for their married children. However, if the child waits till the permanent resident becomes a U.S. citizen, then that application will now be moved into the married children of U.S. citizen category. In order to actually get a benefit out of the Visa Bulletin, you need to know two things. You need to know your priority date and your visa category. If you do not know one of these things, it's not really going to be helpful to you to look at the Visa Bulletin. So, how do you find your priority date? How do you find your visa category? You look at your I-130 receipt notice. It will have this information for you. It will literally say priority date and have a date there. And then it will have a category and have the information there. So you will be able to know what your priority date is and your visa category is. If you do not have your I-130 receipt notice because it has been so long, but you have your I-130 approval notice, that same information is on the approval notice, okay? So those are the two things you're going to need. And if you just don't have either of those things, you can always reach out to USCIS to get that information. We are going to start with the final action date. The final action date is basically when USCIS or the embassy can actually approve a visa. Now, if you are in a preference category, which is the F1 to F4 categories, if you are in one of those, you need to pay attention to the Visa Bulletin to know when the embassy can actually approve your case, when USCIS can actually approve your case. So that's why we pay attention to the Visa Bulletin. It's not because we love charts, it's because it actually matters. With the Visa Bulletin, I always like to compare the prior month to the current month so you know exactly what I'm talking about. So right here is the prior month, and right here is the current month. So we want to make sure that we are looking at both to see where these movements are happening or not happening in this case, okay? So for the final action date, There's actually no movement in any category except F4. So F1, F2A, F2B, F3 has zero movement in every single country, right? So again, if you've watched my previous ones, you know that the all chargeability areas is basically every single country except China, India, Mexico, and the Philippines. They get their own category, okay? So basically, for March of 2026, there is no movement for F1, F2A, F2B, or F3. And then when you come to F4, there is no movement for any country except the Philippines. So the Philippines sees a movement from July 22, 2006 to September 1st, 2006. And that is the only movement on this final action date. Okay, we pay attention to this because it matters. Because if you are from the Philippines and your priority date just became current because of the March Visa Bulletin, you want to know that. You want to pay attention. You don't just want to assume that just because there's no movement in all the other categories or for all the other countries, that your country does not have a movement. So you want to pay attention to your particular country if it's carved out, or the all chargeability if it's not carved out. Now, let's go to the filing date chart. So the date for filing chart is basically when you can start expecting the National Visa Center to send you that welcome email to let you know it's time to start filing your DS-260 and your affidavit of support. For March of 2026, the date for filing is also the date that you can start filing your adjustment of status with USCIS if you qualify to adjust your status in the US. Remember, if you are in a preference category, which is what we're talking about, the F1 to F4, you need to make sure that you are still in valid status when you file for that adjustment of status in the US. That is a requirement when you are in a preference category. If you're an immediate relative of a US citizen, one, this video is not for you, and two, you do not need to worry about the Visa Bulletin or this filing date, because again, immediate relatives of U.S. citizens always have a visa available, and if they overstay a visa and they do not have current status because they overstayed a visa, that overstay is waived automatically because they are immediate relatives of U.S. citizens. So for March 2026, we know that USCIS is going to be using the date for filing chart to determine when people can start applying for adjustment of status. They are now going to be using the final action date chart. That is a good thing because the date for filing chart is usually earlier than the final action date chart. All right. So let's talk about movements. Are there any actual movements on this chart? So for the date for filing chart, for F1, there is no movement. For F2A, there is a movement in every single country, and that movement is 1 month. So it went from January 2026 to February 2026. So that's a 1 month movement. For F2B, there is no movement. There's no movement for F2B. And for F3, there is movement, but only for the Philippines. Okay? Only the Philippines sees any sort of movement for F3, and that is going from February 1st, 2006 to June 1st, 2006. And then for F4, there is no movement yet again. So why does this matter? Why do you need to know this? Because this is what you need to pay attention to know when you can actually start filing your applications, when you can actually expect movement on your case at the National Visa Center. That's why this matters. Okay? All right. If you are in a situation where your country is on the travel ban list or the 75 country ban on visa approvals, you need to pay attention to the Visa Bulletin. Again, especially if you are in that 75 country pause, because the embassy is still going to process your visa application. They just can't approve it. They're still going to schedule you for an interview. You still have to complete your DS-260. You still have to complete your affidavit of support. So the visa bulletin is still relevant to you, even though there is a pause, it is still relevant because you need to know when you can start that process. And then you need to have the conversation of if you want to go through the process and be documentarily qualified and go to an interview eventually. Or if you want to wait and not be documentarily qualified and wait to see what happens with the ban. Now, in most situations, I am always going to lean on the side of being documentarily qualified and being in line for an interview than not being documentarily qualified, because the longer you wait to get in line for an interview, the longer it's going to take for you to actually get to that interview. So you do have a choice here on what to do if your visa category comes up and you need to decide whether to file that DS-260 and become documentarily qualified. If you are going through your own immigration journey and you are looking for help with figuring out what you qualify for, what your next steps are supposed to be, or you are now looking for a full representation from an attorney, but you want your forms reviewed, you want your information reviewed, your supporting documents reviewed by an expert in immigration law, then you can also schedule time with me to discuss that option and what you qualify for, what you need to do in order to get to where you want to be. So if you would like to schedule a time to talk to me about your visa issues, your immigration journey, please go ahead and go to my website, lilylegal.com, click on Contact Us, and you can pick a date and time that works best for you for us to talk about your case.